everyone, and thank you so much for coming back and joining me. Now, I am really excited for tonight's video. I'm sure a lot of you will know this if you've been following me on my YouTube channel for a while, that Joker has been like a really highly anticipated movie this year. You have no idea how much I was looking forward to going and seeing this movie. And wow, I went and seen it tonight. I'm home about 2.5 hours, and oh my goodness, this movie was flawless. I'm just going to say straight off the bat, I honestly give this movie a 10 out of 10. Full marks. There was nothing I would have changed about this, not even any scene that I would nitpick on. If I had to be honest and I had to go through the whole film from start to finish, there is not one little thing that I would change about this movie. It was dark, it was gritty, it had a lot of hilarity in it, it had a lot of humour in it. But it was amazing how they actually captured humour within this movie. I have so much to talk about this amazing movie. Directed, written, produced by Todd Phillips. Joaquin Phoenix did an amazing job, honestly. He was absolutely phenomenal as Joker. I did not know what to expect completely going into this movie. Now, of course, I knew from the trailers that the cinematography looked brilliant. It looked fantastic. I did have high hopes for this movie, and I did think that Joaquin Phoenix would do really well. I definitely thought that. But this movie was anything that I could have even hoped for or imagined, like times 10, like times a million even. Best way to describe it was Todd Phillips did a flawless, perfect reimagination of the iconic villain that of course is Joker. Now, Todd Phillips was very open and honest quite a few months ago, which I spoke on, and had said, look, I'm pretty much not taking any source material or anything from the comics, which I thought was actually a good thing, because sometimes, when someone's, reimagining something, it depends on how they're reimagining it, and if it's going to be something that they're imagining and done well, then great. Because sometimes people can do reimaginations of things and it's done really well. And this movie was phenomenal. Hats off, seriously, Todd Phillips, you are a freaking genius. Notes with me because it's literally like midnight and I'm not overly long back from the cinema, as I say, a couple of hours ago. So I'm going to just go straight ahead here, guys, with all my thoughts, because I'm so excited and there's so much that I want to say. I love this movie. I went with my boyfriend and he loved it as well. He gave it a 10 out of 10 as well. This and John Wick 3 Parabellum, best 2 movies of the year, without a shadow of a doubt. So basically, Arthur in this movie, he was, having to go to state counselling, and, he had psychosis, and we got to sort of see all of his, mental health issues that, he was sort of going through. He was literally being crapped on by society, and was literally you got to see him even being beaten up. And, a lot of the parts that we actually seen in the trailers that was brought out for this movie actually was at the start. Pretty much most of it was at the start of this movie. We got to see that he worked for a company who basically hired out clowns. So that was his profession. He worked as a clown. But of course, his all-time dream was that he wanted to be, this big sort of like stand-up comedian. He wanted to be in comedy. Literally his life in this movie was just go to work, after work, go home. He lived with his mum still, looked after his mother, got beaten up. He got beaten up on the street, he got beaten up on a train, and it was quite literally just rinse, repeat. And that's not really any life to sort of live, really. And, he had enough, basically, and, on a train, he didn't even do anything wrong. A pack of, a group of guys that were being, a-holes, were, annoying some girl, just, trying to be funny, and he just, was doing, his uncontrollable laugh sort of thing which he can't help. And then they sort of went over and they were like, something funny, or, what are you laughing at, or whatever it was they said. And then they just really were beating him to a pulp. And then he ended up, he just, shot 2 of the guys in the train, and then shot the other one when he got off the train. He ran after him. And I want to talk about the pacing of the movie, because pacing is something to me that, well, of course it's fairly important. You don't want to have a movie that's just, so slow and it drags. The pacing of this movie, in my opinion, my boyfriend thought the same as well, it was perfectly paced. There was never a moment where I was hooked from start to finish. There was never a dull moment in the sense of, come on, hurry up sort of thing. Or there was never a moment where you sort of thought, oh, well, that scene could have been, cut, that went on for too long. There was none of that. And how they shot certain scenes as well, certain angles and everything, was incredible. So many good shots in this. Now, what I did love was that this movie actually took notes from Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight. And what I mean by that is in the sense of the darkness, that sort of dark tension and a more serious tone. And that's the thing, like if you look at the DCEU movies, like, sort of like Justice League, Suicide Squad, they're literally just, I didn't like Suicide Squad, I did like Justice League, but let's face it, they've got a crap ton of CGI in them. And what I'm trying to say is if you kind of like look at those movies and then look at this movie, Joker by Todd Phillips, this movie was just a terrifically well-made origin story that really focused on Arthur and really focused on just a really well done story. And this movie was just fantastic from start, beginning to end. With this movie, Joker, Todd Phillips, it was just all, practical effects. It did not need CGI. And this is my point that I keep trying to prove time and time again, because you do not need a crap ton of CGI if you have a fantastically done movie, people who know what they're doing, and a great story. And this was just a brilliant origin story, honestly. And the thing I love about it is you don't actually have to be a comic book geek. You don't have to be a comic geek. The reason being is, yes, with Christopher Nolan, Dark Knight, say for example, yes, they took from comics and stuff like that, right? But at the same time, he did add in like little wee parts that he added in as well, and little elements as well. Whereas with this movie, of course, we already knew that Todd Phillips hadn't taken any source material from the comics. But with that, that's fantastic in the sense that you could recommend this movie to, Bob's your uncle, or, your next door neighbour, or anybody from Adam, because they don't need to know anything about the comics. They don't need to know anything about, do you know what I mean? Literally, I even said to my mum and my dad, you should go and see this movie, whereas there's other kind of movies like DC and Marvel movies I couldn't tell them to go and see. It's a movie for anybody. Like, quite literally, anyone could walk into this film and understand it, because it is just a fantastic film, and it just felt so real to me, and I just felt so hooked and tied in to Arthur's story that it just felt real to me. It felt like I was watching someone's real life story, and that was the whole point. Interestingly, Joaquin Phoenix, he was actually saying that, the way like roles like the likes of what he done Joker, you have to kind of really go into a really dark place in order to kind of, get into the character and get into it. But he said he didn't really feel like he had to do that. And he didn't feel sort of like really exhausted that he was expecting. He just found it really, exciting, and, he really enjoyed, doing it, and he loved taking on the role. So I just thought I would add that in because I thought that was quite interesting. I mean, this movie literally focused on so many different things. It focused on, the economy, it focused on realism, it focused on mental health issues as well, which I want to sort of touch upon as well, because, one thing I noticed within this movie was it did touch upon mental health issues, but they made it, at times they made it like into like humour, and made it, try to make kind of it funny, kind of in a sense, in a light humour. But what I noticed in the cinema was, it was almost like people were afraid to laugh, or maybe they just didn't find it funny. But it's almost like we do still live in a society, of course, very much so, where it's snowflakey, and people maybe didn't want to laugh in case someone sitting beside them maybe knew someone with mental health problems. But the way Todd Phillips smartly made this movie was, it wasn't like that. It was just they were trying to find humour in what he was going through and through his struggles, and I thought that was so smartly done. Honestly, I thought that was a brilliant decision that they made, because the film was very humorous. I very much so thought. Now, I did like the way Todd Phillips, he sort of made a story in among this movie, which was, and I thought it was very well done, about his mother. and she actually had mental illnesses as well, we got to learn. And she used to work for Thomas Wayne, who of course is, Bruce Wayne's father, Batman's father. And I did know that wee little Bruce Wayne was in the movie, because from when I did my first trailer reaction, I was like, oh, wonder is that like Bruce? Because of course, like, it looked like they were standing outside, like what kind of looked like, the Wayne Manor, and little Bruce was in the movie, and I love that whole scene where he put on like the clown nose and everything, and he sort of went down the wall, and they were sort of like talking, and then he kind of brought his magic into it and everything as well, like through the gate. His mum was convinced, because of her mental illness, that when she had worked there, that she had had this relationship with Thomas Wayne, and that then Arthur was then her son, but her son to both her and Thomas Wayne, so Arthur was his dad. But that of course wasn't the case. She was imagining all this. I have to say, my favourite scene in this whole entire movie, because it was just so well done visually, it was so well visually shot, was when he had basically went into the Arkham Hospital to find out, if he was actually adopted. And he really didn't want this information to be true. And he went in and he, sort of stole the files. He grabbed them off a guy in the Arkham Hospital, and he sort of was running away in the hospital in a state of panic. And he was standing in the staircase, and he was, quickly trying to read through the notes, of the file of his mother's. And then he obviously seen that he was adopted and everything, and that his mum had all these mental illnesses and everything. And as he was reading through this, and it was sort of like hitting home sort of thing, sort of sinking in, there was this scene where he was no longer on the stairs, and it took us into the past of his mother being spoke to, and she was being told, look, we've been over this time and time again, like, he is not, Thomas Wayne's son, we have been over this, that didn't happen. And he was standing there behind the guy that she was talking to, and he was smoking, and the smoke flames and everything, it kind of looked like they were kind of moving where Arthur was standing, and he was just sort of standing and listening. But it looked like literally he was in the room. But how quick they shot that and how well they done that visually, I just thought it was amazing, honestly. And that was my favourite scene from this whole entire movie. Robert De Niro, who I absolutely love, and I was so excited that was going to be in this movie, because of course he was in the trailers, so we knew that. Robert De Niro was in this movie, and I think he was in it for the perfect amount of time, to be honest, the length of time he needed to be, because obviously this is an origin story, so it's about, Joker. But he played like sort of like a nighttime sort of talk show host kind of thing. And his mum, Arthur and his mum would have watched this. It was kind of like his favourite show of theirs or whatever, and they would have always, sat in the bed and watched it together. Arthur wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and he went on and did like a little, stand-up. The way comedians, always start small. They go into like a wee place, that not many people know of, that comedians kind of, go to. And he got up on the stage, and he just couldn't stop his uncontrollable laughter. He just couldn't stop laughing. And what was so smart was the way they actually recorded that part, because there was like a music that was kind of played over it, which was kind of to make us think, but more so make Arthur think that, because it kind of looked to us and him as though he was getting good feedback from the audience, and that they were, perhaps laughing at him. And he did think they were laughing at him. But of course, we then later seen that wasn't the case, because Robert De Niro then, sort of caught wind of that. Somebody must have told him about, that had been recorded of him on stage. And basically, Robert De Niro was a bit of an a-hole in this movie, because he was making fun of him, and he showed that clip on his show, is Murray show. Then, one of his agents or whoever called up Arthur and asked him, if you want to come on to the Murray Franklin show, which is Robert De Niro's show. And what was so cool was he obviously accepted. He was practicing at home, what way he would go on and what way he would, introduce himself and everything. And sitting beside him, I just happened to notice there was a Murray Franklin cup sitting beside him, and I just thought it was like kind of a cool, maybe like an Easter egg or something like that. It was sad because whenever he went on to the show, he was in the dressing room, and he sort of put the gun to his chin, and he was considering killing himself in the dressing room. But then he sort of was like, no, I'm going to flip the script here, and he just went on to the Murray Franklin show, and he ended up, basically Murray was sitting really making fun of him, and poking fun at him and everything, and he ended up actually, he shot Robert De Niro, and it was so funny because the whole time he was sitting with his legs crossed, and Arthur was just constantly, instead of calling him Murray, he was going, well, Murray, and it was just the way he was saying Murray, calling him instead of Murray. It was so funny, and it was hilarious. But anyways, I kind of thought that he might have shot him, but I kind of also at the same time wasn't sort of expecting it. But what I absolutely loved was when he said in the dressing room before he went on, he said, you know, to Robert De Niro, you know, can I just ask one thing? We've seen this in the trailer anyway. When you're bringing me on, will you introduce me as Joker? And they were kind of like, well, what's wrong with your own name and everything? And he said, oh, but you said on your show that I was Joker, because he didn't even remember saying it, because whenever Robert De Niro, you know, was, you know, kind of making fun of his clip, you know, when he was doing his little wee stand-up show, he had called him that. So that's where he got it from. He's like, oh, well, that's what you said, sort of thing. And I thought that was just really cool, you know, that's why he wanted him to introduce him as Joker. The funniest scene from this whole movie, and my second favourite scene from this movie, I couldn't stop laughing. It was beyond hilarious. Basically, his two friends came to visit him, and he had like scissors in his hand or whatever, and he killed one of his friends, and his other friend was a dwarf. He's like a dwarf, right? And so of course, you know, he's, you know, small, you know, in height. And after he does that, you know, he has all the blood all over his face and everything, and his friend's like, Arthur, why would you do that? Why would you do that? And then he started, I can't remember what it was he said, but he started saying something in like an English accent, like, he was talking about being on the Murray show tonight or something. I'm going on the Murray show tonight. He's like, I'm going to be on the telly, or I'm going to be on the TV tonight, or so. I can't remember what it was he said, guys, but it was in an English accent, and it was absolutely hilarious. Then after that, you know, his friend went to leave, but he wasn't tall enough to like open the lock. You know, after it had happened, all the blood was everywhere, and he was like, Arthur, can you, like, you know, help me to open the door? And he's like, yeah, okay, you know what? You were always one of the ones that were good to me, or something like that, or that were nice to me. And oh my goodness, that was freaking hilarious. And of course, you know, because Arthur found out, you know, all that about his mum, she was actually in hospital at the time when he found out, and then he sort of like smothered her with the pillow and everything. He had just honestly had enough. And like after he killed his mate, he went onto the steps and he was, you know, just dancing around and everything. But that's the thing with the steps, he had to take those steps every single day. And I loved how, very smartly, I think the director, that's what Todd Phillips done, was the steps were there to represent his hardship, and, you know, like, oh my gosh, the daily struggle, you know, walking up these stairs every day. And I think the stairs in some way represented the crap that he was having to go through on a day-to-day basis. Ended with Bruce Wayne and, you know, the parents walking down the alley, and, you know, of course the scene where his parents get shot. Yeah, of course that was actually inspired by, you know, Joker. And everybody, you know, when he was standing on top of the car, everybody was looking at him, you know, and almost like worshipping him, like, you know, you are the man kind of thing, you know. And I loved in the movie how, you know, it was like an unnerviness thing that he had, was he always, like, he did like a dance and everything, you know, he had this sort of, it almost looked like it was a structured, incorporated dance that he was doing every time he was sort of like really, you know, sort of like unnerved. Honestly, this movie gave me The Shining vibes, you know, the movie The Shining. If you haven't seen the movie The Shining, oh my goodness, just watch it for Halloween this year. It is a superb movie. And why I'm saying I got The Shining vibes was because of the unnerviness, the darkness, that tension. How this movie just showed how bad his mental health actually was, and it just kind of, things just got worse for him. I mean, he even in his imagination had a girlfriend who actually did live in the same building. Like, she did exist, but not in the way he had her exist, you know, like that they were in a relationship. It literally never happened. And he had convinced himself that it was. And after he had went to the hospital and killed his mum, like I was saying earlier with the pillow, he walked out and it was raining. He was in the rain and he went up to his, you know, building. And when he was getting on the lift, the way that scene was shot, wow, it was absolutely dark, unnerving, but it was blimmin' brilliant. He just sort of turned around, his hair was wet like this, and it was really dark, and but it looked like he was literally looking at me, but he wasn't. He was looking at the girl that he was convinced was his girlfriend. And at the start of the movie, she was sort of saying to him, and this part did actually happen, you know, the way she was saying, oh, this building's, you know, are something that like it's crazy or something like that, and she went like this, like that. You know, that did actually happen, but obviously, you know, the whole relationship and everything, that didn't actually happen. But then he went up to the apartment after, you know, he killed his mum and everything, and walked into her apartment and sat down like they were in a relationship. And she was like, what are you doing here? You're in the wrong apartment. You're Arthur. Isn't your name Arthur? Like, my daughter's in bed trying to sleep. And then he just like, oh my gosh, like he realised like, oh, so we're not like, I think he then realised, well, you do honestly feel really, really sorry for him. I mean, there was definitely a lot of laughter in this film. I love the hospital scene with the gun where, you know, he was doing like, you know, sort of like an act for, you know, really terminally ill kids. And the gun sort of like fell out and like slid across the floor. But again, no one laughed. No one found humour in that, which again, Todd Phillips literally proved that we still have snowflakes keep a fall on our heads in this society. But what I found was smartly done with that was it kind of fitted in well with the story, because of course then they were questioning, you know, him because of the killings, you know, the 3 dudes from the train that time. You know, so the gun actually, although that was a joke in that scene, it actually fitted in well with the actual story of this movie. I also say I love the fact that Frank Sinatra, of course his song, you know, Send in the Clown was in this, which we knew it was going to be anyways. But I loved that they had that in there. The music was fantastic. The music was very dark. It very much fitted well with the movie. Overall, this was just, as I said earlier, a brilliant reimagination of an iconic film. Some people were sort of worrying about it being really like sad and like emotionally traumatizing. I didn't find like it was one of them movies where you had to sort of like reach for a tissue. It was more just very real. It was a it was very much about realism. It was about the economy, as I say. It was about focusing on his mental health issues and focusing on his struggles. Yes, you did feel sorry for him. I felt sorry for him, but I never once felt sad in the sense of like I wanted to cry or anything. Like, yes, when I found out that, you know, his mum had been in a relationship with somebody, and you know, the poor guy, God love him, poor guy was, you know, actually tied to a radiator at one point, and he was physically abused. You know, yes, that did make me feel sad, but the thing about it was they didn't actually show those sorts of things. Does that make sense? You know, we got to have, you know, a general idea of things that were going on, but they made it serious. It was dark, serious and gritty, but at the same time focusing on certain things of his life. He made it humorous. He made it seem like we needed to see the humour in it as well, and I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I hope you understand what I mean by that. But overall, this film was flawless. It was perfect. One of the best movies I have seen in a freaking long time. This one and John Wick 3 Parabellum, best 2 movies I have seen in many's a year. Let me know all your thoughts and opinions below if you have seen the movie. Thank you so much for coming and watching, and I will see you all in my next video. But until then, don't forget that the Force will be with you always.